Joining us from Moscow to talk about the Syrian crisis is international affairs and security analyst Mark Sleboda. With us here in Washington is J.D. Gordon. He served at the Pentagon under two U.S. defense secretaries, Donald Rumsfeld and Robert Gates. And joining us from London is Kamal Alam. He's a Syrian military analyst and a fellow for Syrian Affairs at the Institute for Statecraft. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Kamal, let me start with you. What do you make of that White House decision to deploy dozens more special advisors to Syria, something like 50? Is it going to change the balance of the war, or is this too little, too late?
I think, no, it's perhaps too little, too late, because, again, the main problem for the Americans and the Western coalition is they don't have the right ground intelligence, and whoever they partner up with, they're not well equipped, not in terms of hardware, in terms of the intelligence to fight whoever they're meant to fight.
And JD, isn't that the problem here, that the United States doesn't seem to be prepared for this? The other thing is that President Obama has been very careful, very cautious to make sure that this doesn't violate his pledge. He doesn't want to put boots on the ground. So he says, these are not boots on the ground, these are advisors, these are special forces that are going in there. But, I mean, could the U.S. involvement gradually expand?
It could, but I don't really see that happening for now. I think that this is the result of when you get a president who basically became famous for being against the Iraq War. So he was against the Iraq War and pulled out our troops there, and he hasn't been that eager to keep the United States involved in Afghanistan either. So he's really been a peace president, won the Nobel Prize, and so he doesn't want to get into these foreign type of entanglements. He doesn't want to have U.S. casualties. But I think the United States government has been working on the wrong problem. And I think the real problem is, what do you do with artificial states like Syria and Iraq, who once you push the dictator aside, it's chaos? And you have Sunnis and Shia and Kurds.
How do you mean artificial states? You mean the fact that they were created by colonial powers, or?
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah. I mean that they were under the Ottoman Empire for centuries, and then European colonial powers, the British and the French, divided up these states and forced groups that had been rivals for centuries to live together. And so you got dictators like in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, a minority population who ruled with an iron fist. You remove him, it's chaos. Same thing with Syria. When you push Bashar al-Assad aside, he's an Alawite, which is about 10% of the Syrian population, yet him and his father ruled with an iron fist as well. So once you marginalize the dictators in these artificial type states, you get chaos. And I don't think the Obama administration did a good job handling it, nor do I think the Bush administration did a good job handling. I think So
what's the solution? Redraw the boundaries, the borders of these countries?
I think so. I think so. I think it's time to look at a realistic situation where you have the Islamic State has conquered the Sunni areas of Iraq and Syria. Why shouldn't the Sunnis have their own state? Why shouldn't the Kurds have their own state, other than being dominated by the Shia? Because the Sunni areas where the Islamic State has the territory, they consider the regimes in Damascus and Baghdad, the Shia regimes, as the occupier. Right. So why would you send U.S. troops to liberate them and turn them back over to the Shia? That'd be doing Iran's bidding. So it's a real mess, and I think the U.S. government and all the other governments are working on the wrong problem.
Well, let's go to Mark in Moscow. And Mark, you said that. There? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Yes. First of all, J.D. a little bit contradicts himself there, because first he acknowledges that the people of this region have lived together under the Ottoman empires, the British empires, and then he tries to say that they've been at each other's throats fighting, forced into artificial states. While the exact lines of these states may be, about 100 years old, that's older than most states in the world, it's certainly not true that these people have been at each other's throats throughout history. In fact, they've lived peacefully under multi-ethnic, multi-confessional empires like the multi-ethnic, multi-confessional Syrian state. To suggest that the solution is a sectarian division of the country would be an invitation to ethnic cleansing, genocide, and the mass forced migration of people to an extent that would make the refugee crisis so far look absolutely minuscule in comparison. All of the powers at the Vienna talks, all 20 powers, including Saudi Arabia, the United States, Iran, Iraq, the United Kingdom, the EU, the United Nations, China even, everyone agreed that the only political solution is for a united secular Syrian state. So I don't know where JD is coming from up with this neocon solution of carving up and throwing millions of people to one side and the other, imagining they all live on nice little orderly lines. But it would be an invitation to an even worse bloodshed than we've seen so far.
Okay, JD, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that in a moment, but I want to go to Kamal first. And Kamal, you know, let's look at the reality of the situation right now. There is a civil war taking place in Syria, despite, you know, what we've just heard about borders being drawn by colonial powers. Right now, what kind of pressure is Bashar al-Assad under? I mean, he's lost ground, but is his government in danger of collapsing soon?
So I think there's an important point Mark just made. So the Syrian government at the moment is not in any danger of collapsing. And the main reason is the Syrian government has never been an Alawi government. Bashar al-Assad is Alawi, but the majority of his army officer corps is a mixture of Sunni, Christian, Druze, and Alawi. It's the only Arab country which has 7
generals
that are Christians in the
army. The vice president and the prime minister are Sunni.
And same with Saddam Hussein. If you look at the house, the cards that Iraq, when you went to take Iraq out, 15 of the major Baathists in Iraq were Shia. So yes, both countries have been dictatorships, but actually they're very multi-ethnic and multi-sectarian. The big support Assad has now is he still controls most of the important cities, barring half of Aleppo and Idlib and Raqqa. And so I don't think Assad's in any danger of falling because he still holds the urban center. He's lost a lot of ground in the deserts, but almost all the area that ISIS controls is irrelevant strategically, apart from the 2 cities of Raqqa and Idlib. So I don't think there is much danger of him falling. Yes, of course, he's under a lot of pressure. He's been fighting on 6 different fronts, but his army have done remarkably. There have not been any major defections in the Syrian army. And again, it's very important to stress that the heart of the Syrian army is in Homs and Hama. The military academies are in Homs and Hama. A lot of its officer corps are Sunni. So it's a complete fallacy to say it's an Alawi state. It's never been an Alawi state.
JD, I want to give you a chance to respond very quickly to what you heard there, and then I have another question on the actual battle taking place.
Sure. Well, here's where these guys are coming up short. Yeah. Number one is I said that they were at each other's throats when you throw out the dictator. Right. So these areas have always been ruled by a strongman, whether it's under the Ottomans or under the colonial powers or the dictators that came afterwards. They're at each other's throats now because there's no strongman. Yeah. That's why it's chaos. So they didn't mention it. And the second point is oil money. Right. Since the 1970s, we got to look at how many hundreds of billions of dollars have flowed because of oil through the region. And so there's a lot more to fight over right now. So they're coming up short there.
Okay, I want to talk now about the U.S. response to what is taking place in Syria right now. You know, there's an analyst at the Institute for the Study of War, and he said there's a military saying, and it goes this way. It says, you need to lead, follow, or get out of the way. And he says right now U.S. policy is somehow failing to do all 3. Is he right?
Yes, I agree. I mean, the response from the Obama administration just has been to try to take the path of least resistance to cause the least harm. But the Syria red lines were an absolute failure, and it put the United States in danger because when the president says something and then doesn't follow up, people don't respect us. So that was harmful. And then just the limited number of airstrikes, most of the aircraft come back without dropping their bombs just because of the fear for civilian casualties. Mm-hmm. And then just the 50, some special forces, less than 50, going to the Kurdish areas. That's not enough. Of course, it's a positive step, I think, to help the Kurds there, but not enough. And this program where they spent so much money, $500 million, and they basically got 60 guys who didn't last a couple months. There were 4 rebels fighting for all that money. So the administration's response has been somewhat of a disaster.
Well, this latest group, the Syrian Democratic Forces, they're AWOL right now.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, I want to go to Mark. Mark, I want to look at conditions on the battlefield in Syria. You have written, quote, that the United States' inability to create any real moderate forces to succeed in Syria shows the complete unreality of its strategy and program. Explain that one to us. And at this stage, I mean, do we know who the United States is supporting, who they're not?
I'm quite sure the United States government knows who is who and who they are supporting. They're not exactly feeding that information to their public and their press. JD was a little modest when talking about President Obama's, as he put it, pacifist stance and unwillingness to commit to Syria, because there's the much publicized, a very failed Pentagon program to train. It ended up with some 5 fighters who were actually moderate fighters, vetted, who were willing to fight ISIS at a cost of $500 million. The rest of them all took their weapons and ran right over to Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But there's also the much less talked about CIA program that has been revealed in the pages of the Washington Post and the New York Times this summer. This program was spending $1 billion US taxpayer dollars a year for the last 4 years to train over 10,000 not very well vetted Islamist proxies in Jordan and inject them into Syria with the express purpose of regime change. Now, this program has also failed. These are, proxies that are trained, armed, and actually paid salaries by the U.S. government. That is, U.S. taxpayers are paying the salaries of, quote, rebels, unquote, to overthrow the Syrian government. I think the U.S. people should really question that. But they have also largely disappeared into the ranks of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the other jihadi groups like the Islamic Army of Conquest, taking their weapons and their expensive training with them.
So, JD, I want to get a quick response from you. So the forces are there, the money's there, the training's there. What's gone wrong?
Well, I think that the United States is working on the wrong problem. I think that you should realistically look at what's causing it. I believe that's the radical Islam. There's been a fight between the Saudis and the Iranians since the 1970s, the Shia versus the Sunni. Who's going to control the Middle East? Who's going to control Islam? And they've been pumping in billions of dollars, weapons, fighters, ideology into that mix. Basically, I think the Saudis and the Iranians are burning down the region, Iraq and Syria. But the administration doesn't really acknowledge that so much. I think it's a series of Band-Aids, that what they're doing, and I think that the Russians have made it even more complex, because I think that Vladimir Putin only wants to prop up Bashar al-Assad because he has his base of Tartus, the only base outside this Soviet Union.